Off the shelf. A very good morning to you. My name is David Batsoffen, and today I'm joined by author and author mentor and all sorts of wonderful things, Sarah Bullen. This is her brand new book, The Other Side, and it's published by Jonathan Ball. Sarah, good morning. Welcome to you. It has been a long while.
It's been a while, and I think the last time we chatted was when I had launched Love and Above, my previous book.
Correct.
So we seem to be doing book chats.
Book chats indeed. So tell me about The Other Side. I know the beginnings for you were you did take a visit to the other side. So let's start there.
Look, this book really came about because of that. So what happened to me was a rather extraordinary and strange event, and it happened 10 years ago. Well, it was in 2012, so it's more than 10 years ago.
Right.
And I was, at the time, my husband was at the very end of a 4-year battle with brain cancer. And it was the last month of his life. It had been an incredibly rocky ride for 4 years of fighting this cancer. I was a young mom. I was 36 at the time. I was already a published author. I was working with authors already at the time, helping them write their books. And at the very last month of his life, I got a little chest cold,
Mm,
just a normal flu. And what happened was completely unexpected. I messaged my office. I said, courier my laptop. I'll be
mm.
back on Monday. I wasn't back on Monday. Within 24 hours, I was in ICU on life support and in a coma. And I was to stay in that coma for close to a month.
Wow.
And in that time that I was fighting for my life with a diagnosis of pneumonia in a coma, I went on an extended near-death experience.
Mm.
I traveled to other realms, other worlds. Part of this near-death experience was actually saying goodbye to my husband in I'm going to call the spirit world. A lot of this, David, was detailed in my last book, Love and Above.
Mm.
Um, and so I myself have been through this near-death experience. I wrote about it a decade later. It took me 10 years to actually write a book, and I was very lucky that a publisher said, we want that story.
Mm.
But how this book, The Other Side, came about was in all the talks about Love and Above, my last book.
Mm.
Um, the questions that came at me were not what I thought. They weren't about the brain cancer and the wonderful adventures I went on after my coma. It was all about what happened during your near-death experience. What happened? So the questions came and came and came, and I decided to explore it a little more and actually write a book that
About that.
gathered
Mm.
African near-death experiences. Yeah,
But
that had
is
happened
this
in Southern Africa.
do you think, Sarah, that people are interested in near-death experiences because death is the sort of last unknown? Nobody really comes back to tell you about, is there a light that you have to walk towards, and is there a long corridor and all that type of thing. When people die, they are normally gone. So everybody, if they can speak to people who have had these experiences and survived, they want to know perhaps what's in store for them when their end comes.
David, I was to realize through this period, initially, of course, and many people, you're going to find their stories in this book. If they have a near-death experience,
Mm,
you don't go and shout it from the rooftops. It's quite confusing, and I'll
mm,
I'll chat a little bit about that later, why it's so confusing. But what I found increasingly, and it is a huge movement and phenomenon in the world, is people are looking for answers. And this question of what is on the other side, what is there when I die, is the question of all time. It
mm.
really is the question of all. And what near death does is it's that tiny sliver. It just allows us to peek over the garden fence without
Like,
actually having to die. It's one of the few places
mm,
that science can investigate what happens and what are the glimpses and what is seen by people who have died and come back. So there's this huge upswelling of spiritual searching in the world, and it has moved a lot in the last 10 years out of organized religion where it was held for so many
mm,
centuries. And there's just this movement, this huge movement of people exploring and asking, and they're looking to these places. They're looking outside of the churches and the organized religions. They're trying
Because
to
it doesn't
touch it themselves.
because it doesn't always have to be about religion. Near-death experiences doesn't mean that you've seen whoever you believe in. It just means you've died and you've come back. And you've come back perhaps with a different viewpoint. I know people who have gotten sick, not been religious, come through the illness, and then found religion, and that's fair enough. But there may be people that it works in reverse, that they were religious, they have this experience, and they come back and they go, hang on a second, it's got nothing to do with religion. It's just me and what happened to me. And let me tell you my story.
Right. Well, that's really interesting. And so, firstly, in terms of science and our explorations and its explorations into
Mhm.
near death, and they are very extensive. A lot of them I speak about in the early parts of the book. Firstly, there is no correlation between having a near death experience and being religious, which means
Yeah.
people, firstly, the first thing is a near-death experience is unwanted. People aren't searching for a connection to spirit or to God or the universe, creation, great mystery, Yahweh, whatever we may call
Yeah.
it. It happens unwillingly. Now, what then happens within that space, within that strange place, is outside of religion often. In the book, you're going to see stories of people who were atheists who saw God, and
Yeah.
people who were very religious and saw the great universe. So this is the question you raised is really fascinating. So the first thing we know is that religion is not specifically linked to anything you see in near death, but often what it happens is it is the framework we use to interpret this huge, great mystery.
Mm.
So, for our brains often to understand what it is, we may use a religious framework that we understand. However, and this is really interesting, when you read these stories, many of which happen in Southern Africa, often what happens is it's not beatific and beautiful, and it's not all about God and the angels. In fact, many of the stories are very confusing and distressing because they are really an experience of somebody's soul, theoretically, who's left the body.
Is it almost
They're
then?
not yet.
Yeah. Now, I was going to say, is it almost like drowning then? Because you're fighting against something that you're out of that is out of control. If you get
Well,
my
exactly.
drift. Yeah.
Pardon the pun. Yes, so that was my experience, David,
Mhm.
and quite a number. In fact, I would almost say all of the near-death experiences in my book. It's an uncomfortable place
Mm.
because what's happened is you have died, so clinically you are declared dead, but you're potentially, and this is my interpretation, you're not quite ready to go yet. So my personal near-death experience was very confusing, strange, and unwelcome. In fact, it was a fight. It
Right.
was a soul fight, because I was leaving, I was in another realm, I was in another space, but there was an understanding that I wasn't quite yet supposed to be there. Um, when I came out of my own near-death experiences, the name on everybody's lips was Dr. Eben Alexander. And he was a neuroscientist. He was a neurosurgeon who had died and come back. He had had a 7-day near-death experience, 7-day coma. And he wrote a book called Proof of Heaven.
Okay.
And for me, this was a terrifying thing. It was the same year I had my near-death experience. And I was really scared even to read that book because the fear in my heart was, well, he went to heaven. I was somewhere else. I was in the great expanse of nothingness. And what does that mean about me? And what does that mean
Yeah.
about what I saw?
And what does it mean about your belief
So, really,
system up until that point? You know, we,
correct, which
when,
is really interesting. What does it mean about my belief system up until that? My belief system was I was raised Anglican. So I had a very firm faith in a strong religious background. And at the same time, over the journey of my husband's own fight with cancer, we had stepped into a world which I would call shamanism, which was traditional African medicine. So he worked with ancestral work and with
okay.
energetic work. So already I think I'd stepped out of the kind of mainstream belief system. So what I saw there reflected that very much
How
in
how
my
did you
narrative.
find how did you find the stories in the book? Because obviously, you mentioned earlier that you don't shout about your near-death experiences from the rooftops, because I should imagine that a lot of people would go, ah, that's you just think that. That's not really what happened, because they don't understand mysticism or any of that ilk. So, how did you find the people in the book?
Great
Including,
question, because
including, I have to say, there is a psychic rabbi, which fascinated me because people often say I'm psychic. Hang on a second. They say I'm psychic or psychotic. I never quite remember which is the word that I meant to use.
and there could be a very fine line, I think.
You better
So the
believe.
first So you're right about it being quite an undiscovered. The first thing is when you have a near-death experience, you don't often know it. Nobody says to you, by the way, do you know you died on the operating table? Doctors don't simply come and do that. So
No,
the
they don't want to
stories in
do
the
that
book,
because you'll sue them.
100%. So the stories you're going to read in the book, you're going to find that the person found over time what happened.
Right.
They knew what happened to them. They knew that their soul, spirit, whatever it is, went somewhere really weird and it was vivid.
Mm,
My one story, who is Glenn Douglas Haig, was shot 7 times, was dead for 20 minutes, declared dead on arrival, woke up on a gurney.
mm,
Glenn Douglas, it took almost a year to piece together, and eventually he actually bumped into the paramedic who came to the initial call out and said to
mm,
him, the paramedic said to him, "What do you mean you're alive?" He said, "You were dead in the ambulance." And that's how he started to piece together that that weird thing that happened to him wasn't a dream. It wasn't something he imagined.
mm,
It was actually a near-death experience. How they found me was as a product of the work I do. So I work with authors and
mm,
I speak about writing and I work with people on their stories. So over time, every time I told my story, I got emails, I got phone calls, I got Facebook messages, I got people coming up after I'd spoken about my book, Love and Above, saying, "Sarah, I need to talk to you.
mm,
Something really weird happened to me like that." So I started to gather the stories. And I got a lot of stories, but because my background is as a journalist, I'm still a journalist.
mm,
I wanted to be quite rigorous in the stories I chose. So I went through a process of interviews and verification to just really find, was this a near-death experience? Was it an out-of-body experience, which I include in the book as well? I
mm.
included people who had radical out-of-body experiences or epiphanies, as they're called in the religious traditions.
Yeah.
So I started to vet and verify the people and the stories to make sure that they really were what
I was
we were
going to
looking
ask
for,
you
which
that.
were
You You preempted my next question, because there are lots of charlatans out there who purport to have been to the other side, wherever the other side is. And then if you dig deep enough, you realize that they've just made the story up. And if you tell yourself a lie long enough, you begin to believe it. They may have done it for the right reasons or the wrong reasons, but I should imagine that at the end of the day, you wanted your book to portray people who have been to the other side and who have come back with stories to tell.
absolutely. So, in terms of the international body of studies, which is near-death experience, it's quite scientific. There's the
Mm,
Virginia's University has a division, a neuroscience division that has a category of tick boxes that really are a classification of near-death experience. I use that at times, and you have to have kind of met a number of the criteria to be qualify as a near-death experience. There are a few things, David, and they're kind of things you would expect. The first in is a sense of leaving the body and either seeing your death called or witnessing people moving around you and trying to resuscitate you. Second is moving away from the body. The
mm,
third is encountering a huge presence and divine force in the universe? And that's a really interesting question because what that is varies hugely.
Person to person, yeah.
Another person to person. Another really common factor is encountering a barrier or a boundary through which you cannot cross. And this is important, and
Uh,
it's really standard. So very often in the stories I found, that could have been access to heaven, so people
mm,
could see in but couldn't go in. Or in fact, there's a number of stories of people seeing hell, but they couldn't get in. They're not in it yet, and
okay.
that's important. In the indigenous near-death experiences, which is also I've found in this book, that barrier may have been something like a river they couldn't cross, a
Okay.
land they couldn't enter.
Mm,
So these are common. And then there's a really another common kind of tick box, which is what is often called, it's either called a life review, a council of elders, the book of life, the Akashic records. So it's a moment in which the person who's died has to sort of account for the life they were given, the talents they were gifted with, and whether they've done anything with
within.
them.
Okay.
And then another really common factor of a near-death experience is a return to the body. And this happens in so many ways. It can be a willful, conscious, it can just be they woke up, like Glenn Douglas Haig, he just woke up on a gurney on the way to the morgue, or they could have fought their way back. So there's a number of things that have to happen. But the most important thing is you have to either have died or nearly died, very,
Okay.
very close to death, where
So,
so these were things I checked.
how did it? I'm going to vanish from camera for a moment because the book dropped on the floor and I need to pick it up. And I don't want you to think I've vanished. Um, there we go. And I'm back. How did
There we go.
how did your near-death experience then end? Did you just wake up and return and go, oh, where have I been for the last month?
Right. Well, mine was personally an extraordinary experience. Bearing in mind, I'd already been for 3 weeks
Mm,
in out of the body in a soul journey. And what happened in the real world is my friends, family, loved ones across the globe organized a prayer circle.
mm,
On a particular night, they got together and they prayed or they meditated. Didn't matter what the religious affiliation or non-affiliation was. And what did happen in the outer reaches of the universe is I know that I heard.
mm.
And in my medical charts, the very next morning, they start to note a turnaround. And I didn't just find my way back, I fought my way back. I had to find my way back, and it took a long time. I was in a coma, and coming out of a coma is a process of moving into consciousness and back, in and out of consciousness, and that took quite some time for me to do. So mine wasn't an automatic return.
You
I
didn't
actually
just wake
found my
up.
way slowly. I didn't just wake up. I fought my way into consciousness and then I slipped back out of it over quite a long period of time. But in that time, it's a very different experience. And I chart that in the book. I'm back in the physical world. I'm back on earth, put it that way. I'm between my body and consciousness and out of it. Whereas before I was very, very far away in far away places in this universe. Whereas at that point, I was much closer to my body.
Did you find
But
with
the story's different.
I was about to say, did you find with the people, and we're talking about The Other Side, which is Sarah's new book. And I'm going to ask you about the flamingo in a moment because it fascinated me. I wondered why it was there. Did you find that everybody, although their experiences may have been different, all had good experiences, or were there some that literally saw the other side and were so terrified that they just went, no, to heck with that, I'm not staying here. And hello, I'm back and I'm alive and I'm going to be here for a while.
Absolutely. 100%. That's the kind of misunderstanding about this fact that you've had a near-death experience and then maybe you saw God or you enlightened. In fact, a number of them, I have two of them in the book, were what are categorized as hellish or traumatic near-death experiences. And in both of the ones I have selected in the book, one is Hellion Page
Mhm.
and the other is Mohammed Lape, both of them were taken to hell. Now, Helene Page grew up in a very religious household. Mohammed Lape is a is a Christian, and
Mm.
in fact, a preacher and a cell leader, a church cell leader. And both of them had highly traumatic experiences in which they were taken to this very uncomfortable place. It's not uncommon. In fact, it is common that people are shown things.
Mm.
And they're actually a huge category called distressing near-death experiences. And in fact, after interviewing so many people, I would like to say that most near-death experiences are distressing. Despite the fact that when you come back, you may choose to live a different life, it is a very distressing experience to leave the physical body and be thrust into a different world. Whether there are beautiful creatures and God and music, which some people had, a beautiful tunnel of light, majestic divine beings, or whether there's a something else out there, the experience is unwanted and unwelcome in a way.
Mm.
And and what people use or do with it, or whether they even ever talk about it, is another question. And both of these distressing ones, the one person, the one Helene Page, took well over 2 years to even discuss it with anybody.
I was going
She
to
was so
ask you about
traumatized.
that. Yeah. Because it can't be easy because again, as we said earlier, people may ridicule your experience because it's ridicule, I think, is just a way of making them feel a little easier about what might lie ahead for them because they may die and not come back. Because I should imagine these near-death experiences are the exception rather than the rule. Or I may be wrong.
Yeah, so exactly that. So more than, the thing that came across in all of these stories is a near-death experience is something so extreme and so vivid. It's never to be confused with a vision or a dream, Dreams fade. They
Mm,
get a little bit vague. A few hours later, you can't remember them. The things that we found in the book that I gathered, these mystical experiences, they get more and more acute and vivid and hyper realistic as time goes on.
mm,
There's a story in there which I particularly love. It's Andre the Toy, is known as the big positive guy. He had an experience on an operating table during a cancer surgery. And what he had was, we don't know if it was a near-death experience or I qualified as an out-of-body experience. He had a vision and he was given 17 spreadsheets with
mm.
things he had to do in his life, detailed to the letter. Now, Andre is a mathematician, so it
Right.
in a weird way makes complete sense that the
Yeah.
visions he was given
Well,
came in that
well,
form.
yeah.
And to this day, and we're talking 4 years later, he can remember every name, every tab on those spreadsheets, exactly what was said. So it's a strange thing, a near-death experience is. What do you do with it? You
Mm.
don't always shout it from the rooftops. You may mention it in passing. Oh, the strange thing happened. And unless you've got people who can unpack it with you,
Yeah.
takes a while to make sense of it. And I think any mystical experience, David, it takes a while to understand
Mm.
what happened? What was the meaning? What do I do with it?
Yeah. It's not something
And
that
do
you
I
can.
have to do?
Do you have to do anything with it? You're quite right. Because if you're sitting at a dinner table and you drop this into conversation, one of two things can happen. Either it gets picked up and somebody goes, "Wow, tell me about it," or they ignore you and continue doom scrolling through Facebook or whatever they were doing before you dropped this bombshell. And then I should imagine it leaves the storyteller even more unnerved because you've now dropped this huge life-changing experience into a public space and everybody's ignoring you. So what do you do with that takeaway?
Exactly. And there's stories in the book, and I'm going to quote the one Colleen Joy Page. She's quite a well-known spiritual leader and coach in South Africa. She
Right,
had her near-death experience. She was 3 years old on an operating table. Her
right.
brain at that couldn't quite understand what happened, but she went to a place that she called home.
Mm,
This beautiful, and she drew a picture of it, but at age 4. She spent her life dedicated to the pursuit of finding that place again, that space again,
right.
and that journey into finding what she then called home, she now calls self.
Okay.
She's a non-duality teacher. Some people call it God, some people call it other things. So she took that experience and it guided her life. At the same time, there are people who have that experience, and it just is something that they know. It was a strange and weird experience.
Okay. Now move on.
Um, and move on. And there's no rule about it, what
So
we have to do with it.
this is the issue that I have. Whenever I get involved in somebody that I'm really interested in listening to, like yourself, time just flies by. So we're running out of time. So I need to ask two things. Why the flamingo and where people can get the
Mm.
book or how they can
So
acquire
the flamingo. Yeah. So the flamingo really was a symbol, and it really is this incredibly elegant creature that lives on the land, but it's suspended.
it.
And I
Mhm.
really love the image of an animal that is between land and air, which is really what this
Okay.
other side is. It's the kind of so it was really just a beautiful symbol, and the flamingo's feathers also kind of just dissipating. So it speaks really to this intangible quality of life on earth, this embodiment that is above and below, the spirit and the spirit which always wants to rise, and the soul which wants to ground in family and in community. So we have that pull
Mm.
as humans. Um, so I love that imagery. Um, the book is available at all bookstores, Amazon. It's even on Audible, where you can listen to it being read out to you.
Who read it?
And also, David,
Who
and
read?
one interesting thing I think, not only I read it, can you
Okay.
believe I read it? I
Yeah.
mean,
Because reading
absolutely. I
books
was
is not
often,
easy.
it's not easy. It's
Yeah.
not easy. And
Even though they're your
I
own
had a
words.
time, it's very difficult. And I don't know if this was a compliment or an insult, but somebody messaged me the other day and said, "Oh, Sarah, I've been listening to your book. I listen to it night after night, and it always puts me to sleep, your voice." So I
Take it
thought,
as a take it as a
wow,
compliment, Sarah. Take it as a
I'm going
compliment.
to take it as a compliment. Yes,
The book is
exactly. So that's
called
good.
The Other Side. It's published by Jonathan Ball. As you heard Sarah say, it's available in all bookstores, good, bad, and indifferent. Last question, and it's one that I always ask authors. Your face is not on this book at all. Yet, do you ever walk into a bookshop specifically looking for your book and do one of two things? If the book is on the shelf like that, then you can go, look, it's a new book by Sarah Bullen. I've got all her others. I wonder what this is like. Or if the book is that way, you go, no, it's got to go this way so that people can see it.
100%. I do that for my own books, and because I'm a literary agent and an
Yeah.
author coach, I do for all of my authors. I've got some of their books here. I flip their books around. I put them in the bestseller pile. I
Yeah.
move out
Oh, good
those
for you,
international
Sarah.
authors.
Good for you.
Yeah. No, we must support local authors. So I really
Yes,
love that and to
yes,
promote that.
indeed. The book, once again, The Other Side, written by Sarah Bullen, published by Jonathan Ball. She's Sarah. I'm David. Thank you for joining me on Off the Shelf this morning. Sarah, as always, it's been wonderful to chat to you.
Thank you. Lovely, David.